Welcome to The Rally. This podcast includes commentary and conversations about issues relevant to clinical psychology. It is intended to educate, entertain, and enlighten, and is not a substitute for actual mental health treatment. Individuals who share personally here choose willingly to tell their stories to benefit you, the listener. All other references to clinical situations are altered or limited to protect confidentiality. For more specific questions or help with a personal situation, please consult a local mental health professional. Therapy, mental health, real life. This is Psych Rally with Los Angeles-based clinical psychologist Dr. Martin Hsia.
All right, welcome and thank you so much for tuning in to the first and introductory episode of Psych Rally. My name is Martin Hsia, as you heard from the voice of Tamara Fritz, who will be introducing each episode here. If you have an interest in people, in human behavior, the human mind, how we struggle and how we overcome, this podcast will be right up your alley. If you are a fellow therapist, a psychologist, clinical or otherwise, or some other mental health, medical, or helping professional, welcome as well. I think you'll also find you're in the right place. And if neither of those things really describe you, but you just like hearing people tell moving personal stories, or you're interested in hearing commentary about a range of issues in our world from the perspective of clinical psychologists or mental health professionals like myself, that's totally cool as well. I hope you'll tune in and find something interesting and entertaining here on Psych Rally. So that you know who's doing the talking here, I'll share a little bit about myself and the inspiration for this podcast. I'm a clinical psychologist, primarily in practice as a psychotherapist with a group here in the Los Angeles area called the Cognitive Behavior Therapy Center of Southern California. I was born and raised here in West LA. I lived back east in Boston for 5 years for college and worked a year, and ended up back here in Southern California to get my doctoral degree at Fuller Graduate School of Psychology, which is part of Fuller Seminary, a school that also trains people to serve in pastoral roles or to be leaders and academics in theology and philosophy, among other things. Why start this podcast? Well, I am fortunate enough to be passionate about what I do. I love helping people grow and improve their lives, address problems and issues through the process of therapy. I love getting to know new people, learning new things. So I thought, well, why not make a larger forum out of this, broaden the field of engagement, make it stimulating, enlightening, and entertaining, and hopefully contribute something of value to anyone who wants to listen in. So if anything you hear on Psych Rally speaks to you, teaches you something new, or touches anyone's life in a positive way, contributes to a better marriage, family, workplace, more compassionate or understanding world in any small amount, well, that's good enough for me. I'll say mission accomplished. What you'll hear on this podcast are conversations with colleagues in the field, fellow therapists, psychologists, advocates, as well as people in related lines of work. Really anyone with an interesting perspective on self-improvement, helping people work towards being the best versions of themselves, however defined. And I certainly hope to share some of my experiences and thoughts, but I have questions and always want to learn more. So I want to hear from others, and I hope you'll join me on the journey. I'll also be inviting really anyone with an interesting story to tell about a personal struggle, real people talking about dealing with specific issues. And as we get started, some of the first interviews you'll hear are with some personal acquaintances of mine, not clients I see professionally, but some friends and family actually, who were very kind and, as you'll hear, very bold and open with what they share. So I hope you'll be as moved as I was. Let me say this too. One of the best things about being in this line of work, psychology, is that it's our business to study and learn about and help people regardless of context. And while we'll definitely be talking about some technical and psychology-specific terms and issues here, as far as I'm concerned, psychology relates to everything. So, don't be surprised if we talk about race and social issues, religion and politics, current events. We might talk about some sports, pop culture, film. So keep an open mind. A quick personal story here. My grandfather, I get to see him every few weeks. He recently turned 109. And his mind is actually quite incredibly sharp for his age. But, he's not really able to walk. He's quite hard of hearing. English is already not his first language. And certainly having lived most of his formative and working years in Hong Kong and Shanghai between the 1930s and the 1970s, psychotherapy is not really a known profession to him. But he really tries to understand what it is I do, as his grandson, and he's very curious. So he'll ask me, he'll say, "So the people come to see you. What do you tell them?" That's my little impression of him. But, I always stumble because I don't know how to explain the process of therapy to someone of his background, from his generation. Plus, I'd kind of have to yell from 1 foot away, which I always sort of feel bad about. But now, I don't know that my grandfather or many centenarians out there are going to be listening to this podcast. But I do hope we bridge some gaps here with people who may be uninformed or misinformed, or maybe can just learn something new about psychology or mental health issues and what therapy is, what it brings to the table. Because there's this unfortunate reality that, as my friend and colleague, Dr. Ryan House, puts it, therapy kind of has an image problem. There are already certainly some very harmful stigmas out there about mental health issues, mental illness in general, but therapy in and of itself is also misunderstood and often misrepresented. So I hope this podcast will be one among the many efforts out there to show a more positive and realistic view of how powerful therapy can be. By the way, I like to have fun. I like to laugh. I hope you'll have fun with me on this podcast. One of my mentors during my predoctoral internship training year, Dr. Goldstein, he would share his philosophy as a clinical psychologist, which was to help as many people as we can and to have fun doing it. And I really like that, and I've tried to sort of carry that with me throughout my career, as appropriate, hopefully. And, you don't think of psychologists as fun people, because we deal with really heavy, serious life issues, and of course that merits our serious attention. But for the sake of this podcast, I'm going to try to strike a balance that's also lighthearted and fun. So if you're on board, I invite you to join me in thinking and questioning, learning and challenging, experiencing, laughing and crying together here. And I hope that if you're a fellow therapist or mental health professional, that we wrestle with some clinical and ethical issues that impact our practice, and that we learn from one another and re-inspire one another. And if you're someone out there listening who is dealing with depression and anxiety disorder and addiction, really any personal struggle and just feeling stuck and alone, I hope you'll gain something from hearing us in the field talking, as well as the stories you'll hear from other people where maybe there's just a piece or a sliver of their experience that tells you that you're not alone. And that's why I call this a rally, Psych Rally, because not only are we going to be energized and stimulated as people working in the field of psychology, but this will also, I hope, be a forum where anyone can come together to be moved and inspired by real people and their stories. And hopefully in the process we can help someone who's hurting, encourage someone whose emotional distress or psychological problems have been minimized, and break down some barriers that prevent people from getting the help or support that they really need. So real quickly, there are 3 questions that I intend to ask each of my fellow colleagues when I introduce them for the first time to help us get to know them at a more personal level. One is which book or resource in our field that they recommend most often. A second one is if there's a work of art, literature, music, film, television that they particularly appreciated or felt moved by. And a third question is a personal event or experience that taught them a valuable life lesson or had a significant impact on them. And it wouldn't be fair if I didn't answer those questions myself up front. So here I go. I would say that regarding books, for me, it's a little book called Calming Your Anxious Mind by Dr. Jeffrey Brantley, psychiatrist over at Duke. And I'm a huge believer in the concept and practice of mindfulness, sort of present moment awareness and attention without judgment. And I don't care what school of thought you come from, mindfulness to me really cuts across so many of those divisions. And really in some form or fashion, I think it's just a necessary component of living well. And Brantley's book to me is just the most concise, user-friendly book on the topic. It's got short chapters, accessible language. It's not dry and academic, nor too sort of funky or new agey. It's right in the middle. And so I recommend it frequently to my clients, also because I see a lot of people with anxiety of many sorts. So for them, it can be particularly helpful. As far as a work of art, film is really the medium that's always spoken most deeply to me, and there are so many that have impacted me greatly in my lifetime. A Clockwork Orange, A Dancer in the Dark, Into the Wild. But if I had to pick one, I will go with Inception. It came out, I think, around 2010. And, top to bottom, the richness of the psychology mixed with compelling storytelling, really the grand magnitude of visual and sound effects. I just think Christopher Nolan as a director, in terms of original content and the scale of production, his films are really top of the class. So, and if you want to see rich psychological concepts of, defense mechanisms, the unconscious, attachment theory, symbolism of dreams on display on a large-scale feature-length film, it really doesn't get any better. I once watched it about 3 times consecutively on a flight back from Taiwan. I couldn't sleep. So that might sound totally pathetic to you, but I was all in. Great film. And as far as an impactful life event, so I grew up in a part of LA where, even though, through my family, I was exposed to the language and food and culture that I descend from, I didn't grow up around a lot of other Asian or Chinese kids or in a largely Chinese community. And in 3rd grade, we had the Cultural Food Fair Day or something like that, where all the kids give a little report about their ethnic heritage, dress up in some sort of traditional garb, and also bring a food item to share with everyone that represents their background. So I remember one girl brought a Welsh leek soup, another classmate brought a Canadian trifle dessert, and as a good little Cantonese kid, I was so excited that my mom had arranged to bring a box of cha siu bao, or in the Mandarin, cha shao bao, which is basically a steamed bread bun with roasted and marinated pork inside. What could be wrong with that, right? And I was so stoked to have my really close friend in the class, Charlie, try one. And Charlie was, well, let's just say, not from a Chinese background. And I'd been telling him about this steamed bun leading up to that day, and he was excited too. And I can't remember exactly what happened, but I guess when lunch came around and the buffet line of kids and parents passed through, the cha sao bao disappeared. They'd been just snatched up real quickly before Charlie had a chance to get one. So I was totally bummed out until my mother tracked us down to the other end of the room and said, hey, there's still one more cha sao bao left. It seems totally untouched. It just got moved to another serving platter, and it got wrapped up in a napkin. So this was the second chance. And I still remember Charlie and I sitting side by side at one of those little kiddie 3rd grade desks, me watching eagerly for him to taste his first cha sao bao and smile with satisfaction as he unwrapped the bun, held it with 2 hands, sunk his teeth into it, chewed in silence for about 5 seconds, and then abruptly spat it out into his napkin, wrapped up the remains, and said, bleh, and walked over and threw it right into the garbage. And, the only word I can think of now that would describe my reaction in that moment was ouch. But I think I just didn't know what to say, and I couldn't really process what was going on for me at that time. But now as an adult, reflecting back, I know that was an early moment when I discovered that my cultural background was an important piece of who I was and who I am. And that feeling of being dismissed or not affirmed, even if totally unintentional, and even if through this sort of symbol of the piece of bread, really set me on a path to forming an identity or wrestling with my identity. And that was when I really knew and experienced at a deeper level that I was different from most of the other kids in the class growing up in this area and in this country, and in a way that could get overlooked or taken for granted. So anyways, that's certainly not a story of me overcoming trauma or overt discrimination or even any major personal crisis. It's just a funny little incident from 1988 or so, but it was significant to me and now shows up on a podcast here in 2016. So hope you're doing well, Charlie. No hard feelings. So thank you again for joining, and please engage with me as you listen. I welcome your thoughts and input about this podcast. This will work best when we have conversations. You can subscribe, download, review on iTunes, tweet the podcast at Psych Rally, like on Facebook, and I'll have some clips on YouTube. Email me about your reactions to things that happen on the show. You can record a soundbite on your phone with a comment or question and send it to me. And if it's appropriate and we have time, maybe we can even play your clip on the show so we can respond and all can hear. Lastly, I've had so much inspiration and encouragement from family, friends, and colleagues to get this going, so many, many thanks to my support network. I am the furthest thing from a sound engineer or a recording artist. I'm not a journalist. I'm just a regular dude who happens to be a psychologist. So it's been a steep learning curve even just to get started here, and any good that comes out of this podcast will in every way be the product of many great people and great conversations. And a special shout out to someone that really helped me immensely in just getting started with this whole recording and sound thing. My friend, the man, Thomas Chan. You're awesome. Go Lakers. All right, so let's get to it. Thank you for tuning in, and see you on episode 2 when my friend and colleague, Dr. Jeanette Lance, and I will discuss some controversies around the practice of mindfulness in psychotherapy. Please tune in.